thank you all for being here on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And I know this is the time when everyone feels like we have all these things that we missed and we're getting behind on. But I promise you, this is going to be a great conversation, and we're delighted to have three amazing panelists to share with us their both experiences, learning, and have just this conversation about collaborative research and how we can think about developing, building our collaborative network and our professional network. So today, joining us, we have Erin Lentz, who is an associate professor in the School of Public Policy in UT Austin. Kate Schneider, who is a research scholar in Johns Hopkins University and is part of the Global Food Policy and Ethics program there. And we have Lauren Chenarides, who is an assistant professor in Colorado State University, the Agricultural Economics Department. So we're delighted to have you all here. And we're looking forward to making this a little bit more of a dialogue. And just so for everyone who is here with us today, feel free to put your questions in chat as they pop up in your mind. We'll have a couple rounds of quick questions, and then we'll open it up. We're hoping to have a lot of time to have a discussion and questions from the audience. So don't hold on to your questions too long. Put them in the chat, and we'll get to it. And as soon as we go through the first opening set of opening remarks. So with that, let me introduce myself as well. I'm Sathya Gopalakrishnan. I am a professor at Ohio State University and also on the leadership of the Committee for Women in Ag Economics. And this is the third panel that we're organizing. A huge shout out to everyone on this committee. We have a pretty long list of people on our committee here. We have among those on the committee, we have Anthony Ponce, we have Sampriti Sarkar, Jamil Lasanta, Kate Schneider is also on the committee, Shelley Suttles, Andy, and I think we have Anne Byrne, and I think that's all of our committee. So this is the third among, and what we are hoping to be a every semester. We've been trying to do 2 per semester, conversations around the hidden curriculum, topics that are of interest, not just on gender, but broadly thinking about professional development and how we might network. So we'll spend the first hour having a more structured discussion, and then a half hour after to find time to get into breakout groups and mingle a little bit. So with that, thank you very much. And let me start out by asking a question to all our panelists, since this is about collaboration. So maybe if you could start by telling us just a little bit about who are your collaborators? What are the types of researchers and scholars that you collaborate with? And so we'll start with Erin.
Hey, everyone. Thank you all for joining, especially the Monday after Thanksgiving. I'm super impressed with your ability to schedule, better than mine. And thank you guys. Thanks CWAE for hosting this. I wish I had attended something similar earlier in my career. So I am actually a sociologist. I just like to hang out with agricultural economists. And I also like to hang out with nutritionists and anthropologists and other sociologists. And so I collaborate a lot with a wide range of social scientists. And more recently, I'm working also with some climate scientists. And I can talk a little bit more about what that's like and people at sort of different parts of their kind of careers and how it's changed after I got tenure and kind of what kind of pressures that created or took away in many cases. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Kate.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks everyone for being here and this chance to talk a little bit about this topic. I think it's really important. My collaborations are kind of across the board, lots of different people from just different institutions, different countries, as well as different disciplines. I work with a lot of other agricultural economists to the extent that I can call myself one. I also am kind of only a pseudo ag economist, but like to hang out with y'all. And I also work with a lot of nutritionists because my training is kind of half and half in applied econ and nutrition. But I also end up with people who have their training in other disciplines that range from livestock science to climate science to ecology. And so it's a lot of fun sometimes trying to figure out how to translate across those different disciplines. And then, yeah, I collaborate across institutions, and I collaborate with people who are both in and outside of academia, so have kind of different incentive structures, different deliverables that are rewarded in their institution, different timelines and paces at which they like to work. So it gets really complicated very quickly. All right, I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lauren Chenarides. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Sathya. So there's a lot of, in terms of dimensions of collaboration that we can cover. So certainly discipline specific. I'm maybe the most traditional ag economist, being in an ag econ department. So a lot of my collaborations are generally with ag economists, fellow ag economists. And that being said, my area of research focuses on food access and food security. So inherently, I tend to look outside of just ag economics for literature, for inspiration, for even the community-based participatory aspect of my research. So with that in mind, I do collaborate a lot with the Economic Research Service. And so what Kate was saying too about collaborating on specific deliverables that might be under different timelines, certainly the output that I work on with collaborators at ERS are under different time constraints than, say, a publication for a journal. So that's in terms of, I guess, disciplinary collaborations. And then regarding levels related to, say, career stage or institution, certainly I'm working a lot with a variety of those folks that are at different career stages. Even now working with folks that are, just maybe even starting a grad program, and that's really exciting. Then regarding institutions, I work a lot with folks here at Colorado State and other institutions geographically, even so far as Germany. I have a couple collaborators that are based out of Germany. And the size of collaboration, I'd say the largest is a new project I'm working on with ERS, and we're putting together a report for Congress, and there's probably 27 of us on that. So I can write a paper on my own and collaborate with myself, or 27 people, but that's sort of my bandwidth in terms of experience and in terms of size of team.
That's lovely. That's quite the breadth in terms of both the number of, how large or small a collaboration can be, and also how broad you go with interdisciplinary collaboration. And we can't wait to get into this more. So let me sort of direct first to Erin, and then we'll have everyone chime in as well. But just if you were to start thinking about how you approach a new collaboration, so what is your process maybe, or how do you think about starting a new collaboration?
Yeah, so there's like two kind of dimensions. One is the social fit side of things for me, and that's ideally I get to meet the person in person before I agree to collaborate, or before we agree to collaborate. And sometimes it's as easy as like getting lunch together or getting a coffee at like the AEAs or something like that. Because I think sometimes it's quite hard over Zoom to kind of gauge whether or not we're going to fit together, right? And so that's a big piece of it for me, is just trying to make sure there is a chance to meet with some folks in person. And that's not always the case, right? Oftentimes I have a collaborator who will bring along several collaborators. And so you're sort of operating on faith that the transitory property kind of works. But there's the personal aspect, but then when we were all meeting before this panel, we had a conversation about these other dimensions that really matter. And one is kind of your timing and how that aligns with the rest of your collaborators. And so folks who are assistant professors, like, making sure that everyone on your team also wants to get this out in a relatively quick time frame so that you can get tenure is really important. And I definitely have had some collaborations where folks are much more relaxed because they have many other projects, or much more not relaxed, but just busy and pulled in different directions, so they can't spend as much time on kind of what like my objectives are. And so earlier in my career, I ended up collaborating a lot more with other assistant professors because we all had the same agenda. I'm like, we gotta get tenure here. As I become an associate, it's kind of expanded and to different folks. And I can spend more time working with grad students to work with them on their projects. But that takes time. So I think that there's that one piece that we talked a lot about, is making sure everybody's time frame is kind of like matching up properly. And then, similarly, another piece of this is around skills and figuring out like, what are the skills that I have that I can bring to the project, and does it overlap with everyone else's skills, or is it a complement? And having 8 people really good at doing the literature review and 1 person really good at producing graphs is like a real headache. And so figuring out that piece is tough. So I'll stop there because I could talk all day about this and turn it over to Kate. Do you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if Sathya wants us all to kind of answer each question, but I am definitely closer to the beginning of my career, and I'm not on the tenure track. And I also work in the kind of food system space, which is both large and a bit political. And so I don't have as much, I guess, opportunity to completely choose my bedfellows, if you will. And I am in some very large collaborations. I have a paper coming out at the end of this month in Nature Food, little self-promotion there, that has 57 authors on it, which I do not recommend. But if you find yourself in that same situation, I am happy to give you some tips on how I've navigated it. You have to, in those situations, I think, grow a bit of thick skin, because you're never going to be able to make everybody happy. And I think, when I have the opportunity to kind of start my own collaborations from scratch, I haven't had that opportunity too much, but I guess I haven't been burned yet. And so I'm kind of still like, okay, that sounds good to me, and kind of willing to go along. And I do think that as I get more experience, I might have a better sense of what to look for at the beginning of a collaboration. But right now, it's just like, are our incentives aligned, and are we both excited about this thing? In which case, let's try it. And so I have like one new grant proposal with a totally unknown collaborator that we just met, but they run a fruit company in India, and it's a great opportunity to do an RCT. And so we're trying to get some funding for it. And so like, that's just a concrete example of something that I'm kind of thinking about right now. And really the only metrics were like, are we both excited about this? And like, do we need the same things out of it? Or can we find a way to both get what we need out of it? And, in terms of getting thrown in with collaborators that I haven't completely chosen, I found it really helpful. It kind of depends what my role is, but when I have the ability to wear a little bit more of a leadership hat, I kind of rest on project management and processes to kind of wrangle people, which it becomes, a nice way to be a little less personal when you're kind of battering them to get back to you about stuff. And so I think, that can be helpful when you're trying to figure out how to navigate a challenging collaboration or something that you haven't fully chosen. I guess that's probably all I have to say at kind of like the outset, thinking about how to start out new stuff.
Lauren, do you have anything more to add to this one?
I think they did a fantastic job covering it. I would only add one thing, which is for the folks on the line who are maybe earlier in their career and they don't get to choose, and it is sort of a, hey, I'm entering something that's already underway, would be some things that I've done that have helped is really just read a lot of what's been already put out there, just so that I feel more prepared to participate in conversations that have already been happening. And then try to, find somebody on the team that really wants to help coach me and catch me up to speed, so that maybe, for example, if there's something that you want to bring to the project and you feel, if I want to feel like I want to contribute to the project, maybe my idea has already been talked about and there have been all these discussions in the past that I could just find someone who I connect with on the team and maybe ask them for coffee or for the office time or something, just to kind of get up to speed on what's been done so that I can be more informed about the contributions I can make.
That's great. Great tips there. And I'll stick with you, Lauren, for the next question as well. Just thinking about, what you think makes a collaboration successful and maybe sometimes not successful.
Certainly. So I think about this in sort of the practical way and then more of like a philosophical approach. So practically speaking, there's two dimensions. One is that, thinking about the output. So if it's, say, a journal publication, it's like, was I able to participate in this team that met this deliverable, say, journal publication. So that's like a very easy metric to measure. Second is, did this relationship endure? If we did have this really cohesive team where everyone had complementary skill sets and we had, this project that generated new ideas, or maybe we created a survey and collected a bunch of data and now we can use it for 2 more papers. That's also something I find to be a really nice generative successful metric, so that one thing generates more product output or more successful output. And then I'd say kind of the philosophical answer for all of this too is, am I learning? Am I learning in this environment? Certainly there are going to be circumstances where I might be caring a little bit more, but if it's really truly a successful collaboration, I'm learning a lot and I'm getting inspired along the way. So the questions I ask myself really to check in with myself is, what am I learning and how am I getting inspired here? And then I'd say that for me, those are my metrics, very much data-driven approach metrics, and then also just this more, feeling type of approach of how the relationship's been successful.
Would anyone like to add to that?
I would, which is to say, I think Lauren's got a really positive view on what success means, and sometimes success means that like you're able to like put the project to bed and kind of agree that was a project that you tried to work on and you finished it. And sometimes, not everybody works the same way. And sometimes that's great because it can spark new ideas, but sometimes it's it can be a really frustrating process too. And I was thinking about like, Lauren's idea of like, what's successful is you're learning things along the way. And I totally agree. What's unsuccessful for me is when I feel really grouchy that I'm carrying more than what I think of as my fair share. And that I think is a real challenge, especially for early career folks who maybe have a real need to get stuff done and they can't wait around for senior folks to get back to them after 2 weeks and so on. And so I think sometimes like I never want to be the person everybody's waiting for, like that I find very stressful. But that also sometimes, I think that's a pretty common situation. And so I think that's, again, where the kind of being strategic about like, what can I do on my own to move this project forward? Are there kind of project management tools that I can do where I have one, like sort of one example is like blocking a chunk of time on everybody's calendar collectively to be like, okay, we're gonna outline the paper together right now on Zoom. It's going to be a nightmare for everyone, but we're going to do it. And then we're going to split off chunks that like people can go off and run with on their own. And so you're not sort of constantly waiting for somebody. And that's where I guess this other piece of it is thinking about, kind of credit statements at the beginning of article, sort of publications will often ask like, who did the analysis? Who did the main idea generation, who wrote the paper, et cetera. And sometimes being able to assign folks to be in charge of either particular sections or particular processes, I think really can help too. And doing that up front can also make for successful collaboration. Sometimes not doing that leads to, I think, less success. I guess that's my experience though.
I will totally echo that. I think clear roles and responsibilities where everyone understands exactly what type of contribution they've agreed to or they're being expected to contribute. So like there's just like clear understanding of like expectations on both sides of what you can get from each other. And I think this is where there are very few upsides to being entirely on soft money, but I will say this is one, because you're forced to have those roles and responsibilities conversations from the outset when you have to put together a budget and you have to allocate different LOE to different people to work on a project together, and you have to outline all the deliverables and the timeline from the beginning, whereas more organic kind of let's do this paper together projects, like they just don't have those externally imposed structures. So I think to the extent that you can just bring those in by setting out a project management plan at the beginning as if you would for an externally funded budget and timeline, I think it really can help kind of have those conversations early, and then everyone's sort of on the same page, and then no one's resentful of somebody else not doing what person A expects of person B that person B may not know person A is expecting.
Right. It's a great point here. And maybe Kate, while you're at it, can you also, think of a situation where maybe, whether a collaboration goes really well or not, are there ways in which collaborations can end or, exit a collaboration, or maybe come to a close and not continue working together? How do those things happen, and how do you kind of think through managing something that's going to come to an end?
I have a few that I would like to end that I don't have the power to actually execute on that myself. So I think sometimes it's, one of the ways in which something unproductive can be helped along to be brought to a close is if it is in some larger context where there is any sort of hierarchy and there is a power holder to kind of, see if you have an ally who can interject. This is more in kind of like large group collaborations where it's not really clear who has the power to invite and to ask people to step off, or maybe it is clear, but it's highly political. And so it's not necessarily easy to do. So I think, finding allies with power in whatever is the network that this collaboration is existing within, if it's a really problematic situation, can be very helpful. I would say, there's also, to a certain extent, I think people kind of quit collaborations, especially large groups. So again, I have this experience of like a 60-person collaboration where there is a good 20 people that we never hear from. And so from my perspective, they're just not really there and they're choosing not to participate. And so they've kind of like quietly backed out. But then there's, other people where they are active collaborators or they are actively there. But their contributions kind of sour the room. And those are the cases where, I wish that I had a better strategy for figuring out how to exit. If it were more personal and I had more power in the situation, I think I would say, close whatever is our ongoing commitment and part and, go our separate ways. I do think kind of natural cadence cycles of projects, get the paper done, or, if it's a multiple paper thing, like just once one is done, just kind of cut your losses, and kind of let that one go. I think that's, the easiest. We all work in very relatively small professional communities. And so, I think it's important not to burn bridges and just to recognize that some people can both be incredible scientists and wonderful people, and they just don't work well together. And, it's, finding a way to diplomatically make your way out, I think, is important, although I have not actually had any success doing it.
No, but it's really helpful to even think through what that process might look like and what are the kinds of questions you might want to ask yourself if you want to actively or passively kind of exit a collaboration. So that's really helpful, just even the thought process. For our audiences, this would be a good time to start putting your questions in if you have questions for the panelists. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'm happy to kind of ask one more. We have several of our audience and our graduate students fairly early in their career, probably, you know, more advanced graduate students. And so I want to ask you all if you have had an experience starting a new collaboration or getting into a collaboration that is outside of your dissertation work as a graduate student. Is that an experience any of you have had and would like to share for the students in our audience?
Lauren, do you want to go ahead? I think you're on mute.
I was trying to unmute myself, my button wasn't working. I have had an experience like this where I was hired on as an RA to a project that was funded through the USDA right away, right when I entered Penn State, which is where I got my PhD. And that work, it helped me identify my dissertation work that I would eventually pursue. So kind of the order of operations was slightly different than maybe other grad students who enter in on a maybe more generic RA-ship, TA-ship, and then start to identify a dissertation topic and then show that how skilled they are, and then they get swooped up by somebody, you know, it's like, I need you on this project. So I think though the core might still be the same in terms of how to you know, project manage your own research, or how for me it was, okay, I'm conducting my dissertation research, which is largely driven by myself in collaboration with, you know, support from my advisor. And so thinking about, okay, being really diligent about creating a scaffolding there in terms of how to pursue that. Meanwhile, thinking about, okay, now I'm part of this larger entity where I might not be I'm a joint decision maker perhaps, and I'm playing a pivotal role in that. And so really it comes down to, how did I manage my time? How did I prioritize? Being aware of, you know, key things like, does this have a deadline? Is this associated, like, is there some kind of, you know, revision that's required? So understanding how do I prioritize the tasks at hand, which might require different levels of urgency. I guess that's how I want to answer it for now. And I'm sure I have other thoughts on it, but really thinking about it more in terms of project management, being as a way of answering the question is, yes, collaborations can look all these different ways, but truly it's I'm managing my own time, and that's a very scarce resource.
That's right, and really good point to keep in mind that collaborative work does take more time than if you could just sit in front of the computer and do your own work. So kind of finding that balance is really important. We have here a question from Anna Claudia about, you know, whether there are ways to spot red flags before you enter a collaboration. So, you know, Erin, you mentioned having a conversation or meeting someone before you actually start a collaboration, and I think that's true for most of us. We meet at a conference, or we might be on a you know, on a related project or a panel together and come up with an idea. What might be, you know, in your mind, what might be some red flags if you're, you know, if you want to think about being cautious about getting into a collaboration?
I could say one, because I'm very aware of my own preferences for communicating via email. And so for me, a bit of a red flag is people whose communication preferences are very different from mine. I do not want to conduct work conversations via text message. I don't have a Mac. I can't type my text messages into my phone. And so it is a big pain to like be thumbing all of that. And it drives me absolutely crazy. And so, you know, I have collaborated with people who really prefer to text message. And for me, like, that is so stressful. And like seeing that message come in is just like so aggravating that like, it's maybe not a collaboration that I would continue to like, you know, pick up for like core work, even though we get along great as humans. The other one is people who don't respond to email. I also have a few of those. And that is also just, you know, it's a red flag for me now, because it really, really delays and adds like a lot of extra transaction costs to a collaboration if you have zero medium of communication and you don't work in the same place. So you can't just like walk down the hall. So those are two for me. I guess that's really just one, but communication styles.
That's a great point.
I think on a more kind of personal note, I think like Kate, it's like I collaborate with like a lot of different types of folks from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of kind of international folks. And I think something that I really get worried about when I talk to collaborators is how open-minded they are. And so if there's somebody who's kind of got a strong sense of they already know what the answer is, or they already know the best way to do something, or they already know the right language in which to talk about something, and it's my job to catch up, like I feel quite wary about that. And as you guys all know, different disciplines have different languages about ways to talk about things. And if you can't sort out like conversationally, like what is it when you say, I don't even know, like something simple like evaluation, like what do you really mean? And that means really different things across different disciplines. And, if you can't kind of have a conversation about that in a way that doesn't feel antagonistic, it's really exhausting really quickly. And I don't want to cast aspersions on economists, but economists have very strict ideas around what's methodologically reasonable. And that can be a real challenge to work across other disciplines who have very different ideas around what's methodologically reasonable. And that, depending on how you feel about what's the right way to do something, it might be really frustrating to work across disciplines. So that's a big one for me.
I love that. This question is really interesting too. I think I wanna just say that spotting red flags also, it's like this, it's almost a privilege to be able to exercise spotting red flags, in a sense of, what do I mean by that? I mean that when I was very junior, if I saw something that I might have identified as now a red flag, I wouldn't say anything because I didn't feel like I didn't deserve to say that. And probably one of the reasons why I felt so much pressure to not say something early on is because I wanted to maybe add to my CV, or create something, demonstrate some metrics of deliverables that I could show output, and yeah, again, just build my portfolio. So coming at it from a more junior place, and being able to spot red flags and say like, hey, this doesn't feel right, I think it takes a lot of courage to do that. And so in hindsight, because hindsight's always the best, it provides the most clarity, I would say to anybody who is maybe a little more junior and is spotting red flags, which might vary a little bit person to person, is that it's okay to say no to something if it doesn't feel right. And it doesn't mean it's going to close doors for you. It doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily prevent you from accumulating some repository of work, or start new projects, or prevent you from working with people in the future. I think it might actually build a muscle that a lot of people, it took me a longer time to strengthen. So that's just, I want to just chime in and say that kind of overarching, because certainly what Kate and Erin said too about communication styles and things is very valid and very important. And being kind of shoehorned into a specific way of doing something isn't necessarily how I want to do work either. And so being brave enough to say, hey, this isn't going to be a good working situation for me, however, in your own words, is something that does take a lot of courage to do.
Couldn't agree more with that. Thank you so much, Lauren, for specifically sharing that point, because it is very hard given differential power structures and the need to establish yourself in the field. So I actually, just building on that conversation, we have a question here from Padmanabhan Shivashankar, and I think it's related, and I'm gonna maybe paraphrase the question just a little bit. Early on in our careers, we've all, I'm a little farther along now, but there is that hunger to be on as many things as possible. We want and feel the urgency to grow our CV. And it's not just an internal urgency, it's as much an external pressure, whether you're on the tenure clock or doing a postdoc for 2 years and you have 2 years make your CV look different when you're back on the market a year after you start the postdoc. And so how does one, or what are your thoughts on balancing time? Because you need to show progress, work on the things that are core in your own field, in your own things that you've already started, and you want to start new collaborations to show that you're building the pipeline. So it's a tough question, but I think it's a trade-off that we all face, and there's a little bit of apprehension to say no, because when something comes your way, you want to grab it. How have you all navigated that space of identifying what the right balance is of being on new things and adding new things to your plate, and making time to do the things and completing work that's already going on, knowing that starting a new collaboration involves a deeper time commitment? So anyone wants to take that one first?
I'll start.
Okay.
So my approach, I've started to kind of curate this over time, more formalize it, but I tend to triage things that I get really excited about. I'm one of these people who's like, I love starting projects. I love the idea generation process. I love the whole, all the excitement about thinking about how I can solve this whatever XYZ research question. So knowing that about myself, like really getting a sense of, okay, when do I face this sense of real excitement? And then it's like asking myself in the moment, it's like, okay, well, can I spend 30 minutes writing an outline for this idea of a project? And I've started this process. I have an overleaf template, and I write out what's the research objective, what's the data I want to use, who's the person I was talking to about this, and then what would kind of be the bones of the question. And then I put that aside in a potentially interesting bucket. And then I just sit on it, sleep on it, basically. And I'm like, okay, what else am I working on right now? And what's my timeline for those things? And then I see, is it in the next 6 months? Is this a project I can consider in the next 6 months? And then I'll follow up with the person who I had that brainstorming session with. And I say, hey, I really love this idea. This is the timing I'm working with. Is that something that is, of interest to you? Because likely the other person that's brainstorming is probably in my position too, and is really excited by the prospect of a new idea. So it's not necessarily, but any sort of urgency that I'm imposing on myself really is my own. And then really being upfront and clear with asking the other person of, okay, on your end, what's your time frame? Does it jive with what my time frame is here too? Because maybe by the time 6 months rolls around and we can pick up the project, we've learned a lot more in that 6 months, so that we can enter into that collaboration more efficiently. So my process, again, to kind of like circle back and answer this, being this, trying to prioritize, what do I need to get done? What do I need to, the outputs that I get, I'm very mindful of what I'm currently working on, so that I can spend maybe 80% of my time really moving things through the pipeline that I'm already working on. And then I really do devote intentional time, maybe 20%, maybe less than 20%, where I'm sitting down and I'm reading a little bit when I can, I'm taking notes, I'm stitching together other ideas, so that I can start to fill that potentially interesting bucket and then turn it into something down the line. Because then in doing that process as well, I'm also tuning in to what I'm reading currently, so that I can keep an eye out for, hey, how might this fit into something down the line? So making that a more formalized process has helped me.
Yeah, I think Lauren's ideas are totally great. And I think there's also this question of who do you enjoy working with as well? And I think that's an important piece of all of this. And I think the question in your chat was talking about, personal experiences from grad school days. I still collaborate I started grad school in 2004, or maybe sooner. I still collaborate with folks that I met, while I was a grad student, and it's crazy. It's been 20 years, and I think that, we're not always writing all of the time, but that's a long-term relationship where we really understand how we work together, and there is something where I think you don't have to have, it's not like you win if you have the most number of collaborators, right? It's like you win if you have collaborators who you enjoy working with and who you're doing interesting stuff with, you know, and so I think as I've gotten older, I've tried to kind of collaborate with folks that I know I'm going to enjoy working with. And oftentimes, you know, I'm sort of, maybe I have a couple of collaborations that I'm trying out and testing the waters, or it's a bigger group or something like that. And those might spin off or they might wind down. But there is something important. I mean, our jobs are really hard and they take a lot of time. And so it's really important to like the people you're working with if you can. I mean, I feel like that's one of the joys I get out of this job, is like brainstorming ideas with folks. Like, I love that. I mean, I think like Lauren, it's really fun to start projects. I want to do it with people who I find intellectually stimulating. And that might be your colleagues, and you're going to know each other for a long time, which is, you know, really exciting.
I would agree. I think I read something else in that question as well. It's kind of, you know, how much networking is a good use of time and how much is too much. And I think that no one can answer that for somebody else, in a sense that, you know, you kind of have to feel it out for yourself. But from my perspective, I have really benefited from networking relationships, even if they don't become collaborations. Sometimes, you know, just that a lot of people know who you are can help you navigate potential collaborations. It gives you a bunch of people who know how you work, who maybe know how the other person works. You can get like a third party perspective if you have an opportunity and you're not sure and you can't really tell if you should pursue it or not. There's other people you can go to. So I think, you know, cultivating, you know, a network that includes both peers and people who can be more mentor in a mentorship role is beneficial for everything throughout your career, and especially when you're navigating difficult choices where you feel like there are trade-offs. So for me, you know, I couldn't caution, like, I couldn't say don't network. I always think that that's a good use of time.
And I would say, like, Kate and I met through networking, and we haven't collaborated, but it's really great to know that Kate's out there, and I've, you know, made Kate come give talks in my classes, and we've, you know, brainstormed about ideas. I mean, so it's like we haven't collaborated yet, but like I think there's something lovely about having Kate around as a resource. And, you know, I think, yeah, it's the fun part, I guess.
Same. I would say the same about Erin.
That's great. And thanks, Mrignani, for adding a response to this question as well. And I think that's a really important point in the chat about being honest and conveying how much time you have. I think Lauren mentioned this as well, like being upfront in your communication about what your capacity is to work on a new collaboration is really important. So thank you for all of those comments. And I also couldn't agree more with all of you about the importance of networking as an early career professional. Graduate students, particularly, right? Even if it's someone who's not in your field, just making sure that people know what you're doing. It gives you, for a number of reasons. One, it's going to help you practice your pitch. Whether you do anything else or not, you're going to do your elevator pitch to someone who doesn't know your work. That in and of itself is a good reason to network. But it doesn't have to lead to a research collaboration per se. It's just someone being able to say, oh, I met the student at this conference, and I know they were working on something related to this. And then they would try finding you, or would kind of ring a bell if you apply for a position in their department later, and so on. So those are all really good points. Thank you. The next question is from Glory. And this, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this as well. As an early career young researcher, how do you approach someone to ask them to join a collaboration that you're interested in? So either how do you ask to join projects that you would like to work in? And the corollary to that question is, how do you approach somebody to become a collaborator on an idea that you have? So I think there's both sides. So how do you go about approaching people early on in your career?
I can take the easier corollary. So something that I try to do when I'm thinking about a new project is I like try the idea out on people, and maybe I'm not giving them, if I feel like I have this like super innovative, exciting insight, maybe I'm only giving them like like some of what I'm thinking, so I don't get scooped, but that doesn't happen that often. In my experience, at least. But I try to have these conversations with folks and gauge if they're excited about it too. And are they also saying like, oh, have you thought about this? And oh, like I've heard about this data source, or, and some of it is those really informal conversations, that can happen at AAEA, or that you kind of schedule and stop, I've stopped by, old professors' office hours to talk about these ideas. And if there's like a spark of interest there, then there's this possibility for a collaboration. And likewise, when I talk with a colleague who's maybe not interested in it, I'd be like, oh, do you know anyone else who's like thinking about this particular issue? And then you can kind of snowball your way to folks who might be good matches. And I really do think there is sometimes some real benefit to trying those ideas out with a couple of different people to kind of see where they land, and if you're seeing the genesis of the project go in the same direction. So that's that piece. For the how to get asked to be part of a project, I think that goes back to Lauren's point around preparedness and thinking about like, what can you offer to this project? It's one thing if the project sounds cool and you're like, hey, I want to do that too, but that's like a pretty hard sell for the rest of the team, to sort of add another person to kind of manage, and so how do you make it so that what you're providing is a service to that project? And maybe it's the case that you are really interested in this, and this is a direction you want to take your research, and you're going to commit to spending a lot of time to know that literature, or you're going to commit to like really working with this data set because you see it has extensions in other ways. And I think if you're interested in a project only because it's interesting, but you don't know what you can add to it, then I would say don't necessarily ask until you've figured that out. But maybe that's harsh. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah, so Erin, so there's a couple of interesting points too, and I'm gonna focus on the latter part of your response. So joining an project that's already underway and in an academic setting, and so with respect to knowing what you could contribute to the project is quite key, because oftentimes I would say the project organism is probably, I mean, I'm going to assume I'm always the optimist. So I'm going to assume it's probably pretty cohesive. Everyone knows their role. And then knowing what you can, offer to the team in advance just helps. I mean, it helps the organism of the project, but it's probably going to make you happier at the end of the day too. If you know what you can contribute and you're going to be happy, rather than trying to chameleon yourself in some way. And maybe, if that's not your goal, if your goal is to move into a skill set that you want to develop, that's something a little bit different. So that's one thing I wanted to echo about Erin's comment. And then the second thing I want to say too is that sometimes projects, like the infrastructure of the project has a really extensive budgetary aspect to it. So for example, if it's a project that's funded through a grant program, sometimes the PIs just really don't have any give to, or, on one hand, they might just not have any give to allow for a new person to come on. One, two, maybe there's even extra funding. So like asking to see like I know in some projects we've had extra budgets, and we've been thinking, we would love to have someone come on the project who's really excited about it. So thinking about just the budgetary structure of some of the projects too, and really understanding that, maybe how would you ask that, just really just understanding what the project is about, inside of like those underpinnings of it all. So that is more of like a practical matter of things. So I just, want to echo what Erin said, and then also think about like the project in an academic setting, acknowledging that some of these things have some budgetary constraints to them that might factor into the way that you would approach asking to join a project.
I would just add, I totally agree with that. And I haven't really been in the position to ask to join something that was kind of already ongoing. And I'm not sure how I would do that, but I have asked if I could be a fly on the wall in certain meetings or conversations, because I think that it's related to something that I'm doing and I don't necessarily have something to add, except that potentially I could offer future connections to other ongoing projects or something. So, that's kind of the way that I've approached that a few times in the past. But in terms of approaching other people to collaborate, I think that if you have a really clear idea of exactly why you're coming to specifically that person and what you're going to ask of them, then like making that very, very clear. Like when I've asked people to be on the advisory group for a specific project, I put together 3 PowerPoint slides or like, a couple bullets in an email and say like, this is why I'm asking. This is exactly the commitment. I expect it to be, however, in those types of asks, I would always want to make sure they know it's kind of light touch. I'm not asking you to put in much time, et cetera. So I think those are kind of like important details. People are always worried about their time. That's already come up a bunch today. And so if you do have specific ideas that you want to ask of somebody, kind of indicating what type of time commitment you're asking them to make is just going to be super helpful to get them to say yes if it's a small time commitment, and they might have said no if it was an unclear time commitment. And also, to make sure that people who really can't commit to what you need are going to say no.
That's really great. Like all the points here make so much sense. Mrukdeni has a follow-up, and this is more about how much information do you need to give if you're asking for a collaboration? Does it have to be fully outlined, or is it just an idea? And does it matter? Is it different if it's a student to professor or peer-to-peer kind of collaboration? And I think my personal take on that is that I do think there's a little bit of a difference. And if you're going to someone senior, I think having something written out, maybe even if it's a short couple pages of a summary would really help, because it helps them kind of see how crystallized the idea is. But I think that's what she wants to know. Is there what's the level of thought that should have already gone into the idea before you express it and ask someone for them to join or work with you?
So I have like a lot to say about this, so I'll try to rein it back. Before I went to grad school, I worked as a consultant, and that was a really valuable skill. I think it speaks a lot to Kate talking about sometimes you need to be a project manager. And one of the best pieces of advice I got was manage your manager. And for me, this is a really good example of, there's this person who's maybe more senior than me. They're almost certainly busier than me. They almost certainly have more requests for their time in being pulled in a bunch of different directions. And so making their life as simple as possible in terms of being like, I'm going to provide you all the information you need ahead of time. I'm going to send you an agenda. I'm going to have a sense of like, how much time do you have to meet with me, and how do I manage that time to make sure that we cover everything, is really important. And I think that demonstrates that you might be a good person to collaborate with, because you're organized, you're not treating their time as disposable. Like all of these things are really good signals. You're a good communicator. And so for me, I really think that's I think there's a really important thing where you can kind of like hang out and chit chat with a friend in a way that maybe folks you maybe don't know as well need a little bit more kind of infrastructure. That's my opinion.
Really great points, Erin. And I think of this in terms of maybe instead of student professor, maybe like junior and not so junior, and
Totally.
just just this different rather than a non-peer-to-peer. So in the non-peer-to-peer example, I think of it like this idea of okay, I'm going to relate it back to myself, is that the person that I'm consulting with, who's at a higher stage than I am, has institutional knowledge or of something else that I don't have yet. And that comes with time, that in collaborating with them will will help shortcut something that would take me many, many more minutes. So if it's, I'll say, if somebody has really good institutional knowledge about maybe a certain data set and they've been working with it for years and really know the in and outs of it, coming up with a sketched outline, I think, is super helpful for the person that you would then consult with for some collaboratory advice. In the sense that, you can say, here's my idea, here's how I'm thinking about using that data. Is that even possible? Or maybe maybe data is not the way of, maybe it's more like in a publishing landscape, and you want to collaborate with someone who really knows a specific literature really well, and it's a new area you want to get into. So coming up with an outline or a template to bring to somebody in that kind of situation, I think is just definitely the way to go. And then in a peer-to-peer setting too. I mean, I would love to work with people who would come to me with drafts of outlines all the time, whether it's not peer-to-peer or is peer-to-peer. But certainly it's in the peer-to-peer situation, I think of it like, we're kind of more in tandem, and you're kind of like going at it, you're pushing these new ideas kind of like a ping pong, volleying back and forth, like you're playing tennis, or something like that. So that kind of environment might be a little bit different. And then again, like back to what Erin and Kate had been saying before too about complementary skill sets. That kind of environment is a little bit different. So an outline, coming prepared with something, might not be as necessary, but following up with a summary of what was discussed and kind of where you landed, I think that is really important. Not just not just letting it go to the files in the back of your brain, because really the best time to create something tangible is right after you have a meeting. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about too, is that when I schedule meetings, I actually schedule 30 minutes or 15 minutes after my meeting to take time to write down, okay, what did I learn? What did I take away from this meeting that is important for me, just so I can sit with it all. And sometimes it's just an email to the other person. That's very efficient. And then I have a documentation for that for the future.
I would second a lot of what they both just said. I think that when you are working in a hierarchical context and there's a more senior person or just a person with more power, if you don't have a chance to have regular contact with them in a conversation, really clear email updates are really useful. But also after you have had a meeting, like Lauren just said, really clear email summaries, also really helpful. The other thing that, and meeting agendas when you do go into meetings with them. Erin started her comments by saying, like, in my former life before I got a PhD, I was a consultant. So in my former life before I got a PhD, I was a donor. And so I really like concept notes as an idea, kind of like a way to get your ideas on paper and like refine them. And so like for me, that just gives me a format that I'm comfortable and familiar with. And so when I'm talking about new collaborations with people, often it starts with a conversation, but very quickly becomes like text in a 2-pager that we start to refine, that is like, why are we doing this? Can we clearly identify a problem statement or rationale, and also lay out the major pieces of like how we would accomplish what we say we want to do together. And to me, like that is a really useful tool to kind of think through, like, A, is this idea worth pursuing? Can it be done? And B, can we lay it out in a way where we each are able to commit to our different pieces? Do we have all the skills that we need in this collaboration? Do we need other people? And then you also, if you want to approach other people, then you have a 2-pager that it says, here's what we're thinking. Here's, specifically why we need you to plug in, because this is like the gap that we have in our own skills or knowledge or experience or whatever. So for me, like that's the other tool that I tend to use.
This, just to take this to a slightly harder place or darker place or whatnot, there is a concern sometimes with when you're in a hierarchical relationship and you're doing a lot of publishing within a hierarchy and you're junior, there's always a risk that people are going to presume that a lot of the intellectual product is coming from the senior person. And that's the, nature of bias, right? And so I think there is this question of like, how do you make sure that you're able to demonstrate that you are your own thinker and person, And sometimes that means, maybe you can't only collaborate with a senior person or one single senior person, or you shouldn't collaborate only with senior people. I mean, and that's sort of a very deep strategic question, but it's one that I had this delightful time collaborating with when someone on my dissertation committee, but I stopped when I became an assistant professor because I felt like it was really important. And I told him, right, like I was like, I need to make sure that people know that this is my intellectual product and that people aren't thinking this is him carrying me along. And this is a gendered issue, right? Like, and it's certainly also a junior senior issue, but I just want to say it's not without the power dynamics can be, multifaceted, I think.
That's very helpful. As we start, I'm setting up the breakout rooms as we speak. The last, maybe your 10-second response from each of you to if you have a collaboration mantra, and maybe not from what you expect from your collaborators, but really what do you set as a mantra for yourself in terms of what you want to bring to a collaboration. So if you have your 10-second response to that, I'll in the meantime quickly set up breakout rooms. Go ahead. I don't know.
It was like a game of chicken for who's going to unmute themselves first. I guess I lost. This is a really good question, and I don't have a good answer, but I think that I always try and make sure that I'm upholding my own commitments in the collaboration. And I think that I really appreciated what Lauren said at the beginning, that I want to make sure that I'm also learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like to contribute to other people's learning to the extent that they're also in the collaboration for that. And so, those are kind of the three things that I would want to make sure I'm fully showing up to do.
Because I'm at a different place in my career right now where my word is elimination. I'm thinking about how do I streamline. So maybe it's my mantra is more in the sense of, does it fit? Like, it's a question. I'm a questioner, so I'm always going to ask the question. I don't even know what the affirmation is. It's like, how does this fit in with what I'm building, the research program that I'm building? So it's not so much a mantra. I'll think on that one. Great question, but that's where I'm at right now. Period. I'll let you go, Erin. Stalling for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I totally agree. I think there's this question of how does a collaboration serve you, right? Like how does, just because somebody asks you to do something, is it something that you're excited about, or is it folks you want to work with? I think that's really important. I don't know if I'm dating myself, but there's this there's Friday Night Lights, which is like the Clear Eyes, Full Hearts, Can't Lose. My partner teaches a lot of writing, and so he has like a clear thesis statement, good evidence can't lose. And I think to some extent, making sure you're in a collaboration where everybody is on the same page, that's a really important, do we all know what our thesis is? And yeah, I mean, that's like a very basic statement, but are we headed in the same direction? And how do we get there? I think that's something I think a lot about when we're collaborating.
That's great. Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. Thanks for all the great questions we got, and thank you, Erin, Kate, and Lauren for really sharing such deep insight. For those of you that are able to spend a little more time chatting, and if you want to chat with our panelists in a smaller group, please join our breakout rooms. I've just opened all the rooms with 3 rooms. Doesn't look like we have that many people that are going to join the conversations, but I've just opened the breakout rooms, and each of our panelists will be in one of them. So thank you all, and stay tuned for our next panel discussion, which will be in the spring semester. So happy end of the term, and a good new year until next year.
Great. I'll join 3. Does that make sense?
Yep. Let me stop the recording.